Good evening, folks. I'm Ross Weaver, and I'm back again for another one of my Metal Gear Solid V Explained lectures. This one will be, I believe, number 22. We're going to talk about Mission 46, the Truth Mission, the man who sold the world. And we're also going to talk about Mission 00, Mission 0, the Prologue. Essentially, it's the hospital scenario. I talked about in the last lecture how, Mission 46 is not really like an ending, it's more like a new beginning, and these two missions kind of being the same thing is one way it's meant to indicate that. You can think of, it's Mission 00, and the infinity symbol is kind of like a 00 that's got a connection in the middle, and that's kind of what's going on here. There's this infinite loop that's implied by the structure of Mission 46 and 0 being the same thing. Meaning that it's sort of implied that whenever you're going through Mission 46, there's a new Mission 0 happening for sort of a new Snake. And so you can think of it sort of like, this is like the chain of the Ishmaels and Ahabs, and how it turns all this into kind of like a routine, and there's this idea of the first time through it is different than the replay. And it all comes from this looping kind of cyclical structure. Meaning that, upon a replay and revisiting these things, it's not the same. We'll get into it, but there's some stuff in this game that only happens the first time you play it. I have already mentioned, too, some side ops and such, but there's some stuff specifically with Mission 0 that's different the very first time you play it. And then there's some stuff that's different between Mission 0's replays, the flashback version of it, and Mission 46. And it kind of, it's like a sort of differences between first time and replay kind of contexts that apply there. We'll get to it all. It's going to be a longer lecture, y'all. I've got lots of notes on it, so I'm going to try and kind of get through quickly enough, I guess, but there's so much to cover. You can only go so fast here, so we'll see. So speaking of the differences, let's kind of run them down real quick. The first time you play through the game, you'll get the menu that comes up is a shot of the room that Venom's being looked after in. It's from the perspective of the ceiling, and you can see like the ceiling fan and some of the stuff off to the side. And when you start, you get I want to say, I haven't played the first time you do it in a while. I've done it a few times, but I want to say the first time you go through it, you get a replay of all of the crash kind of context. I don't know if they actually replay the crash, though. I'm pretty sure it's the whole "there are no facts, only interpretations" screen with that quote, and it's you can hear a plane crash, and there's like this fire kind of looking light that's coming from the bottom of the black screen where the quote's up, and you can hear breathing that I think is Psycho Mantis's breathing. And so it's kind of implied by the later on all the stuff with Tretage that crash wasn't actually the helicopter crash from Ground Zeroes. That was the crash that happened with Tretage in 1984 when his plane going down in Ukraine. But it's all constructed, right? So we can't really trust it. It's all kind of meant to prime us for what's about to come and sort of get us, indoctrinated into this illusion that this game's story has going on. So there's only really one first time in that prologue mission, and every time after that, when you do it again, it's got this flashback tag, and that flashback tag I'm pretty sure is unique. I think it's the only flashback mission in the game. So there's also this implication of whenever you do it again, you're not really doing it again, you're just sort of having a memory of it. Whenever you replay the prologue mission, that is. Now, there's some differences in the structure of the mission and the things you're shown. The big one, to me, in the opening, when the doctor shows you the mirror or brings the mirror up to your face and shows you your face, the faces are in kind of different orders. So the first time in the prologue, the mirror comes up, and he says, "This is you as you've lived until this day." It's the face of Snake. It's the face we all know, and it's kind of, for the player, it's consistent because we've been Snake. But as we'll get to in the all the course of the game, we realize that this person hasn't really been Snake up to that point. And that's kind of a lie. In the truth mission, we see that the avatar that you choose, once you're told that they're going to change your face in the prologue, you select a face, and then that face never actually gets applied during that game. It's shown in that cutscene in the prologue after the 48 hours and they unwrap the bandages. Right before the doctor gets choked out by Quiet, he shows you the mirror again, and in the prologue the first time, it's your avatar that you've selected. Which should be like a hello, that's not you, because the next time you see your face, it's Snake's face again. It's like a little funny thing they do. They switch it around. So then, in the truth mission, it's reversed. The first face that you're shown in the mirror is your avatar that you selected, and then after the face change, it's the face of Snake. So presumably that's what really happened, was you went in here as the face of your avatar as someone else, and then you came out with the face of Snake. But they show it reversed in the prologue, and then they kind of unreverse it without letting you notice, unless you do notice, as like, it's part of the whole magic trick and the hallucinations and all of that stuff going on in this game. And so it's like you've been Snake this whole time, and so you're going to continue being Snake until you've completed this game, and then you realize you weren't Snake. And that's kind of when you really also leave the identity of Snake yourself behind and sort of ideally start embracing this avatar that you've created. And then, presumably you should be trying to give your avatar a story, because it's like, why did they include this in the game at all? Why in the Phantom Pain can you choose the face of Snake? And I think it's because, the face of Snake is, it's related to the player's choices and all, the Snake persona, so sort of, but it's also sort of like, it's a way of hinting at this hidden story of, as we were told it the first time, the medic is someone else, but then we learned later that the medic is actually Null, and this is Gray Fox's story. Also, the photo's a little bit different, and the doctor's lines are slightly changed. In the prologue, I'm trying to remember what he says in the prologue. I think he says it's the line about tomorrow will become your, like, this was the face you had, but tomorrow will become your phantom when you're looking at your own avatar. And then in the truth version of the mission, he says, I believe it's everything feels all right. And then there's just this silence until he gets choked out. So it's a little bit different. The dialogue's changed up just slightly. And also the photo he shows you, in the prologue mission, he just shows you the photo. You look at it for a second, and then he takes it away. In the truth mission, as he's trying to take it away, Snake reaches out his hand and takes the photo and looks at it and turns it around and sees on the back the name that you've chosen back at the beginning of the game. And says, good luck, your name, and it's from Vic Boss. And Vic is in quotation marks. So Vic Boss is a reference to the end of Peace Walker. At the end of Peace Walker, whenever Boss helped all of the rebels take over Coldman's facility and stopped all the Peace Walker incident stuff, they started calling Big Boss their Vic Boss, because they were victorious in all of this. So it was like a sort of a rallying cry deal. And it seems that this Vic Boss now is not really that Vic Boss, right? Like, it's a lot of people say Ishmael is the original Big Boss, but that doesn't pan out. Why would he need to use quotation marks around the Vic name if that's really the original guy? He wouldn't need to use quotations there because he is the Vic Boss. He was named that, right? So, like I said, the quotation marks around a name is not just to indicate a nickname, it's to indicate a pseudonym, a fake name, really. A nickname's not really the same thing as a fake name. A real nickname is kind of given to you, and other people kind of reinforce it. You don't necessarily choose it for yourself, and that's what the Vic Boss name was. It was a nickname that was kind of given to Big Boss, right? So these little differences are hints as to, what's really going on here. These little structural differences are meant to be compared between the two missions, quite literally. And you see the differences and the changes that have happened here. So in the same way you see these differences and changes between missions 0 and 46, you're supposed to be able to see all the differences between each individual scenario that is in this game and what sort of its copy is back in the past. It's sort of like how, the Truth mission has this copy back in the past, right? At least in our past as we played it. Yeah, and you only get to input your name and the customized avatar thing in mission 0. You don't get to do that in the Truth mission. It just kind of skips over that. So there's again the structure's a little different, and then the endings are different as well. I call it, there's like split endings. The Prologue mission ends with Ahab's version of events, and the Truth mission ends with Ishmael's version of events. Essentially, after the ambulance crash, we follow Ahab in the Prologue, and then the camera follows Ishmael in the Truth mission. I think that indicates that the player character themselves has moved from being Ishmael to Ahab in the course of playing through the game, essentially, and that the person who was Ahab in the Prologue is now Ishmael in this new mission. Essentially, you've become Big Boss, and that's representative of you having played through all the game and then realized that you were Big Boss the whole time. It's like you kind of are Big Boss now, even though you were beforehand as well. And there's this whole Skullface thing going on, but like I said, Skullface is kind of a superimposition of both the Big Boss stuff and the sort of leader turned villain role of Cypher. Anyways, the other difference in the two versions of the mission is the mission tasks are different. In mission 0, you have to avoid reflex mode triggering in the lobby, and then in mission 46, you have to hit the man on fire enough times with gunshots while you're in the lobby, or shooting him with the gun while you're prone on the ground while he's walking towards you. Also, in the mission 0 version of it, you have to ensure that Volgin doesn't shoot you while you're on horseback riding away. I also want to note real quick that the only real reliable way to get an S rank on the Truth version of the mission is to skip the cutscenes, actually. I think you can get an S rank on the Prologue if you just play through it and you get headshots on all the guys and you score well. I think you can get seen and lose the reflex mode mission task as long as you get the other mission task with Volgin and still get enough points to S rank it. It's pretty tight, but it's like it's mostly like a time thing, again, especially with the 46 version of the mission, which I think just relates back to knowing the script, Let's see, what else do I have written down here? Yeah, so there's that screen, I mentioned it about how there are no facts, only interpretations. And I think that, relates back to what I was saying about mission 30 and Skullface's speech about trying to urge the player to see the entire game as symbolic. That whole idea of there being no facts should be taken kind of to its extreme in the way that, it's like none of these things that we're seeing are what we see them as. So the first thing I want to mention, let's get into the events of the actual mission. When Ahab wakes up, there's this fan up to the left, and it's the same hallucination fan from mission 43. So this fan here might be a hallucination, and I'll get to how we can tell it might be a hallucination here in a sec. But we also definitely see something else that we know is a hallucination. Whenever the first nurse comes and bends over Venom, if you're not distracted and you look up at what she's doing, there's this X-shaped IV bag holder up to your right, and it looks like she's reaching up and messing with a cable or a cord that's draped over it, or some kind of a something, but you don't see anything there. It's like whatever she's messing with is invisible. And I think at the same time she does that, the audio for what you're hearing is the man who sold the world, sort of like in the game soundtrack. It's non-diegetic music. It's music that came from out of nowhere when it started. But then once the scene comes up, we know there's a radio that's in this scene that's playing that song. And when she messes with that cable, the audio that we hear in the game switches over from the non-diegetic stuff that started before to the diegetic radio playing the song in the game. It's like this weird sync that has happened, or something like that. And this cable that she's messing with, this invisible cable that she's messing with, makes me think that it has something to do with how Venom perceives reality, and how the player perceives reality via Venom and things like that. It's maybe like a connection to him that we have, but it's invisible because our connection to a game character is invisible, right? Our control is it just happens, right? We just hit a button and they do it. There's no like puppet strings that we see, right? So the invisible bag and the fan are kind of there to prime you for, the idea that what you're seeing is not all there, and what all you're seeing is not all real, essentially. So this doctor and the nurse, then, after the first nurse goes away, there's this other nurse, the one that catches you when you start making noises. I'm pretty sure she's Eva. And the other one, the bald one with her, is the doctor is probably Zero. They're probably there in disguise. I can't remember what her name tag is, but you can zoom in and look at their name tags and get the textures. And they're Greek names that have meaning. They're kind of angelic. One of them's like Constant Guardian or Unwavering Guardian. I think that's the doctor. I think it's Evangelos Constantinou or something like that. And Eva's this blonde nurse's name is something like that. I can't remember. Apologies for forgetting. I don't have it written down here, but you can go look that up yourself, and it's a fun little thing to do. I kind of think of them as like, they're kind of like a mom and dad pair. Like this is kind of Venom's metaphorical mom and dad looking after him after he's had a big scrap out in the neighborhood, and he's been brought back and nursed back to health. But his memories are a little screwy, so they gotta help him. But I want to note, just take a look at the male doctor and his glasses and the color of his tie and shirt, and then compare it to the color of the tie and the glasses that we see Huey first in Hellbound before he gets his eyeglasses destroyed by Ocelot. He's got the same glasses as this doctor, and that color, that kind of blue-green color that's all over the entire hospital. It's kind of odd to see a doctor wearing a shirt and a tie that's also that exact same color, and Huey has got a tie that's generally that color. His shirt's a different color, of course, but his tie is that same kind of blue-green. I think those are just, like I said, hints as to draw you into thinking that maybe these characters are the same, because they probably are the same guy. It makes sense to me that the guy in charge of Venom's, sort of like when he wakes up, and the first guy to have his hands on him should be probably Zero, so that he can be kind of indoctrinated properly, right? But also Eva's got to be there to, kind of provide some motherly kind of perspective, because just Zero and just this doctor sitting here telling us all the stuff that he does in the intro would be a little cold and heartless, So they've got this Eva doctor sitting here she's making these faces, if you look at her, overly concerned, maybe is a good word to describe it. Not like bad acting, just like, she's hamming it up, let's say. I also think that dark hair nurse, that first one that came in, could be Naomi Campbell. Naomi Hunter. Woo, that was a weird Naomi Campbell. That's Supermodel. I was like, where did I pull that one from? I'm thinking of Campbell because Roy Campbell. Anyways. So, dark-haired nurse, probably Naomi. Light-haired blonde nurse, probably Eva. Bald doctor, probably Zero. And they're probably stealing the identities of these real people and using them here in this clinic. And I think that relates to why they essentially stole the face of a real head transplant doctor. The head transplant thing probably relates to what needed to be done for Chico, because we see Chico and his head removed in the PT teaser footage. His head rolling around on the ground like it's an Eraserhead homage or something. I think, like I said, back in Mission 20, the voices stuff that there may have been a conflict between Chico and Big Boss while the transformed crazy demon Chico was out there, sort of captive under Cypher, sort of his Eli phase. Maybe he got in a fight with the original Big Boss and maybe lost his head. That may have even happened in '84 to stop him as giant crazy monkey. Although I don't think they chopped his head off. Anyway, just think of how they stopped Crazy Gohan in the show, and you'll get maybe what I'm thinking of here. Anyways, so there's the nurses and the doctor taken care of, and then Quiet comes in. Well, no, before that, there's the lost limb and the 108 pieces of shrapnel. Let's talk about the 108 pieces of shrapnel first. That's a very specific number, right? 108, they could have picked any number. 108 has a lot of symbolic significance. The 108, excuse me, the first time I came across the number 108 myself was in Final Fantasy Tactics. There's an accessory you get called the 108 gems. And it's like a bracelet or an accessory or necklace, something that you wear. If I remember correctly, in that game, it protects you from the vampire status and the blood. It's called the blood suck status in the in the English translation of it, but in the updated version of the translation, they call it the vampire. So it's like 108 gems being as a way of protecting you against becoming a vampire. Vampirism, if you've seen all my other videos, kind of relates to the parasite. Vampirism was said to be a blood parasite in early versions of the mythology. And so the 108 gems also kind of relates to it's a Buddhist spiritual principle. And I'm not going to go into it. You can just look it up yourself. It's better to look that stuff up yourself than to have me tell you all about it, basically. But 108's there for symbolic significance, and it's chosen very specifically. It's kind of indicates to me that Venom's body is sort of being used as a way of warding against evil, essentially. Let's just put it that way. The lost limb itself, his left arm is gone, and I think it relates again to symbolism. It's not just something they did for literal reasons, and so when you look up what the heck does a lost limb symbolize, the most famous story that's used that symbolism is Of Mice and Men. And just to skip over it, it generally stands for a lost or missing experience. Either memories that you hadn't lost, or an opportunity that you could have taken and didn't take, or an opportunity that was denied to you because of maybe your lost limb. There's lots of ways it can kind of be contextualized within stories, but generally speaking, the arm itself is kind of like memories. It's like the arm is like a timeline, and all of your life is like points on your arm, and so having part of it chopped off is like losing part of your memory. And so that's kind of what's going on with Venom here. Is he may have had his memory either taken from him as part of a plan, or he lost it as maybe just an inevitable consequence of all the crazy stuff that happened to him. There's lots of possibilities, but not very many answers to that one. The lost experience, like I said, is mostly extant in how the game itself has structured its own narrative. And so in a sense, it's not really lost. It's kind of been spread all throughout the whole game. Kind of now that I think about it, kind of a body of Osiris being, cut to pieces and spread across the land and needing to be regathered, kind of a thing. I guess that kind of makes me Isis a little bit in that case. Cool. Anyways, so the lost limb symbolizes his lost experience, and we kind of have to go get it back. That's essentially what's going on. Now, the structure of everything that happens here once Quiet comes in and just crazy stuff starts happening, this whole scenario is based off that 10th Avenue in New York scenario that I talked about in the previous video that's mentioned on the tapes with Ocelot narrating about how Zero's been attacked and how there was this crazy stuff happening in New York. That was probably late 75, maybe early 1976. With Old Fox and the decoy of Zero in the hospital, and Big Boss attacked them. Now, what happened in the previous version of it was, we know Big Boss probably wasn't expecting a decoy. So in this newer version of it, it's like the decoy's status is known as being a decoy. And so I think that's why Quiet is targeting Venom. It's like, okay, so she says after she chokes the doctor and kills him that there's the building shakes, and she gets on her comms and says, "Not yet. The patient in the next bed saw my face." Now, it sounds like she may be referring to us, but if you consider the bed she's standing next to is our bed, the next bed wouldn't be that bed. The next bed would be the one that Ishmael's in. So she's saying that she's here to kill us, and we're kind of the decoy. So that kind of puts us, it's likened to the Zero decoy. And we're kind of like Zero here now. And that kind of brings the whole Huey is Chico thing back from Hellbound full circle here, hopefully, for y'all. It's like we're kind of, going through the stuff that Zero went through. But not really Zero, but his decoy at first, because we are the decoy now. And again, it was like she was saying, I need a little bit more time because I got to off this guy. She moves to kill us first. Would you kill off some other dude if he wasn't your main objective and your main objective was right there? If you're an assassin, you got to kill, when you got the chance, kill your target. So I think that's why she picks up the gun and is about to kill Venom when Ishmael jumps in and saves Ahab. But there's this question of who's Quiet talking to? And we think it's Skullface, but there's no evidence of Skullface existing in either one of these versions of this mission. We know that whenever Skullface is enslaving Psycho Mantis, or Trettage in the game, Trettage gets this black mask that is superimposed over his gas mask's little circular lenses, and it's the same black mask that Skullface wears during the game. So that's our sign that Mantis's actions are coming from Skullface. In other parts of the game, Mantis will have part of his straitjacket burning. That means he's basically vibing with the Man on Fire. And there's some parts in this intro, which we'll get to, where he's got a little Archaea horn that's added. That means he's doing stuff from Venom's mind. Meaning he's so whenever Trettage does in this intro mission, we'll get to it, are just straight up reenactments of memories that he's reading from these people as he's reenacting them. And that's kind of what Quiet is doing here too. Quiet is coming in and assassinating all these people because she's doing what Big Boss tried to do back in 1976. And Ishmael being Fox, jumping in and saving Zero at the last second, and there being this whole sort of chase and sort of cat and mouse game is kind of what's going on here. And that's why all this is happening. Now, the reason this is all happening for us on on the level of the film, why is it all depicted in the way it is because this whole mission kind of serves the structure of it, and I would say on the biggest level is it's all kind of there to stand for the different parts of sort of the Cobra's DNA that makes up Venom Snake and his own DNA. And really it's Fox's DNA. But I'll get to it. There's exactly 8 different kind of cutscenes that you can pick out that depict a conflict between either Ahab and Ishmael, either Ahab or Ishmael, and the XOF soldiers or Volgan or Psycho Mantis. Essentially, there's like a conflict with the enemy. And each one of those conflicts is like a connection. And each one of those connections kind of stands for like a DNA pairing, referring to, again, like the structure of Fox's own DNA. And again, it's more about the parasites, genealogy and the artificial kind of parts of it. So, who's really running this, though? I didn't get to that. If Skullface isn't really running it, and we never see Skullface sort of using Mantis, well, it must be all the people kind of there are really running it themselves. But the person who's really in charge of it, I think, is probably Ocelot. He's the one who's probably talking to Quiet. And he's outside the facility running the rest of the forces. And once they're all kind of, spent and run in there, and they all get killed, his last thing is to go grab the guys out of the ambulance, which we'll get to way later. So each one of these cutscenes kind of depicts a a DNA pair. And the first one happens with Quiet, and so that's kind of our stand-in for the Joy's fight and the Joy's DNA. And the Snake Eater petals, and the Stars of Bethlehem petals are meant to recall Snake Eater, and all of that. I also want to mention this knife that's in this scene. This knife getting thrown into Ishmael's shoulder is a mirror of Venom later stabbing himself in the mirrored shoulder. I think that's only in the low morale cutscene that happens when you come back to base for the first time when there's low morale and guys are fighting. The knife thing, it's a big symbol again, and it's like the stabbing of oneself. If you consider Quiet as Chico, that's like he's stabbing himself here in this cutscene again. It's just happening mirrored, And I think the mirrored thing relates to it's happening in front of Venom, so it's like he sees a mirrored version of it. So yeah, there's lots of cutscenes in this part of the game, and there's only a few playable parts, and the way that's all structured is meant to kind of draw your attention to, each of these cutscenes depicting kind of a different sort of aspect of the parasite genealogy. Oh yeah, they're DNA nucleotide pairs. I wrote it down somewhere else. So each one of these connections in the conflict is sort of like a stand-in for a DNA nucleotide pair, which really is a stand-in for the parasite genealogy. So, and I've said this before, Mission 43, Shining Lights Even in Death, has a big relationship to this mission and its structure, and it's like we're on the other side of it here. But in Mission 43, we were kind of on the side of the XOF squad. We kind of were the XOF squad, really. And it's like now that we've played Mission 43, we should kind of understand better in Mission 46 why this is happening all the way that it is. Whereas in Mission 0, we're just kind of like super confused, which is by design. I also want to mention Quiet's burning and defenestration. You just never get a good chance to use that word. I think it's reproduced here again for symbolic reasons. Probably because when the original big boss attacked this decoy of Zero, he probably had to be set on fire and thrown out the building. And so you have to imagine in New York on 10th Avenue, if a on-fire big boss gets thrown out of a 10th floor building window and hits the ground and doesn't die, he's probably going to cause a little bit of a ruckus. There's probably going to be like, if some dude's nearby with a video camera, he's going to turn it on. I think what happened in that, you can kind of reconstruct a lot of the stuff of what may have happened in the original mission, but it seems like the original big boss was thrown out this window on fire, landed on the ground, didn't die, and then went back in and just caused a lot more crazy stuff. So like the way we come out of the room and then go to the elevator and then he's coming back up the elevator is probably a reference to like you just threw him out the window and he just comes right back up the elevator. It's probably kind of funny, but also like probably terrifying because he was probably, after being burned, looking kind of scary, kind of some Resident Evil Mr. X vibes, I would say. I also want to mention when Quiet chokes Venom here, that's, again, I've mentioned it before, kind of a relation back to Shiva and Parvati and how Shiva drank this antimatter poison that was going to destroy the universe during its creation, and she chokes him to help him sort of not swallow it and keep it in his throat. And his skin turns blue because he's got this poison in his throat that he's sort of keeping from all creation. And he could do that because he's destruction himself. That gets into Hindu mythos, but I think the choking of Venom here kind of relates to that. It also probably relates back to maybe how in Mission 20 we saw the man on fire bending down to choke Venom, and then he stops when Shabani dies, okay? And then it allows Venom a chance to escape, but that indicates in the past that may not have happened. And the way this happens here with getting choked and then blacking out, I think is kind of meant to recall that. Let's talk about Venom's speech here. It's really interesting to me that the very first lines that Venom delivers are in a first-person POV shot, okay? He doesn't speak at all in the intro, and then Ishmael comes in and saves him. And then after you see the pedal and there's the slow motion, Ishmael over there says, "Okay, Ahab, time to go." And Ahab's like, What happened to the woman?" And Ishmael's like, "The woman? We gave her a light. She took the short way down." Now, that looks like Ahab said those words and Ishmael heard those words and he's responding. But let me throw an alternate theory at you. If these two guys are the same guy and they have the Sorrow's DNA, well, then they're psychic. They can hear each other's thoughts. So if Ahab is having an internal monologue thought in the voice of Kiefer Sutherland, Ishmael over there can probably hear it. And so that's probably why he's like repeating his thoughts back to him, because he didn't actually say the thing. It's like whenever somebody says something and you don't hear it and you repeat it back to make sure you got it right. But he's hearing it psychically, I think. Whenever you have a first-person POV motivated shot, it indicates that everything we're seeing and hearing is motivated by what this character that the camera is inside of is hearing and seeing. And indeed, when you are silent but internally monologuing, you will hear your own voice in your head. I think that's what's happening with Venom's first two lines. I don't think he's actually speaking them out loud because we can't ever actually see his face speak them in the game. And so then he gets this digoxin shot from Ishmael. And of course, it's not digoxin; it's foxglove. It's a reference to Fox's new identity, his new glove, his new sock, his new outer shell, his new skin. And that includes his voice, I think. He's internally monologuing as Kiefer Sutherland before he gets the shot, but it's pretty easy to maybe say that he's just doing that because he was programmed to, Literally on a game level, he is. So, it doesn't make sense that would be a different voice and then you get the shot and then get another voice. That would be too obvious, So, information control, right? But, in the way that he can't speak until he gets the shot, I think it's also interesting. The camera is in that first-person POV perspective until we get the shot. And then it kind of leaves his perspective, his first-person perspective, and goes to this third-person perspective. And now we can see his face and we can actually really move his whole body instead of just looking places. And so it's like, in a way, it's not just the Kiefer Sutherland voice and the sort of the vocal parasite that's been injected there. It's like the player's control has been injected there. It's like before, all we could do was really just look around and everything else that happened was Venom doing stuff and we were just kind of along for the ride as the player. And then once we get this shot in Venom's arm, now we can control him. So take that one as far as you want, I guess, in your mind. I think that the vocal cord parasite, it really is linked in with the player's control and the player's own way of influencing the game and all that kind of stuff. So it would make sense to me thematically that that's what kind of allows us to control Venom, is him getting infected, essentially. I guess you could say it's lethal. Anyways. And I also want to mention this. So on the note of this psychic internal communication, I don't think Ishmael's the only one that can do this in the game. I think there's evidence that Kazuhira is able to do this, the Kaz that we see in this game. The biggest evidence is in the post-mission cutscene in Cloaked in Silence, Mission 11 or 40. When you're up in the helicopter, however many dozens of feet above Mother Base, in a banked turn, you're looking at Ocelot and Miller way down on the deck, and Miller's looking up at y'all, and he says, "There's no way she's setting foot on this base." And we can hear him in our ears, and there's this echo. Okay, he's not talking into a microphone. He's not using any kind of a PA system, but his voice is being amplified. Well, this is an ability you've seen before in Metal Gear games if you've paid attention and played Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. Gene has this like commander's voice that he can use to just like speak internally directly to people and give them commands, and they have to follow him. Or if they don't, there's like a lot of sort of conflict within the person, and Gene could use his ability to like cause people to kind of go crazy. I think Kazuhira in this game has the same ability. I think that's how he's commanding people, and I think quite literally he is the commander of probably everybody out in the field. If he's Decoy Octopus, he could easily change his voice to be the Russians', CP commander, and then go back to being Kazuhira, and it would make sense as to how every time the enemy gets intel, Kaz has it instantly and can give it to us every single time, And so I think this is just more evidence that, Venom's other self, Ishmael and Ahab, kind of share a psychic link. So let's see. That's the first page down. we got a few more here. I also want to note, once you get control of Venom and he's out in the hallway, if you pause for a moment and just listen to his voice as he's breathing, it kind of sounds like two different voices. It kind of sounds like Kiefer Sutherland's voice and this other voice that sounds vaguely kind of like Chico's voice that we remember from Peace Walker. Or maybe like a younger boy's voice, It's like this lower kind of, and then there's this higher pitched like, it sounds like a, tightening of the throat maybe, but it also sounds like a younger person's voice. So, take it again. These are all just hints, though. There are no facts here, right? There's just interpretations. So take this as much as you want. But anyways, so then what is going on here is, it's Zero and Ishmael's kind of escape from New York in their hospital, and Venom here is Hideo now. Chico is Hideo. And the thing that we kind of get along the way to note all of this stuff is these blue wheelchairs. I think Zero's kind of iconic thing that we think of him for is sitting in a wheelchair because of Metal Gear Solid 4 and all that context. And all the stuff I've talked about here with Huey and his legs and all those problems. I think in the way Code Talker sits in a blue wheelchair, I think this is all meant to be symbolic of Zero. There's also these blue beds. If you'll notice, there's this it's like just a rolling blue bed with the same kind of blue padding on it. I haven't quite put my finger on it yet, but it's in these certain locations where certain events happen with Ishmael that makes me think that maybe the blue sort of hospital bed has something to do with Ishmael, and sort of like the older Fox and all the stuff he's doing. I also want to note, you come out and he says, "Let's take the stairs." And that's probably not what was originally said if, this was Zero and he couldn't use his legs, right? They probably would have not taken the stairs. They probably would have taken the elevator. And so I think maybe Ishmael's saying, let's take the stairs as like it's another recontextualization. Oh, and the stairs also may have some symbolic significance, which gets into the whole, what do stairs symbolize? If you've watched some David Lynch stuff, you know that stairs kind of are big mojo. Somebody walking upstairs kind of can symbolize a lot, like moving from one world to another, So we'll get back to the stairs, though, when we actually get to this, talking about the stairwell. Let's talk about Tretage. He appears in this hallway after we escape the first room and, decide not to take the stairs. And like I said, I think this Volgan coming back up in the elevator is kind of reminiscent of Big Boss being thrown out the window and then just walking back into the building and getting in the elevator and coming back up to continue his attack on Zero. So if that first scene represented the joy, then this is a new one. So this one represents the fear. This appearance of Tretage kind of comes out of nowhere. Venom's quite literally just like his head sort of moves past the spot where Tretage isn't and then is, and that spot is where the horn is. So it's almost as if you could say that the horn is superimposed on Tretage, as if the horn is where Tretage came from, as if it's the memory of this event that is causing Tretage to reenact all of these things. And so that's why I think Big Boss literally did all these things that the Man on Fire is doing in this mission, because the Man on Fire is sort of the on-site sort of stunt double for Big Boss's actions that won't be done by anybody else, at least. I don't think Ishmael or Ahab here do any of the actions that you can really assign to Big Boss. Like I said, I think most of Ahab's actions can be assigned to Zero, and most of Ishmael's actions could probably be assigned to what Fox did when he was there protecting Zero. But I also want to note that the elevator itself is kind of a symbol of the subconscious mind, most notably used recently in the movie Inception, and how the dream world of Cobb in that movie is depicted as like an elevator with different levels on it. Different levels being indicating different levels of your unconscious, or maybe you could say subconscious if you want to look at that way. Technically speaking, if you want to get psychological about it, subconscious doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. There's only the conscious and the unconscious. There's only the conscious and the unconscious. So this reference to the subconscious and the phantom pain, keep in mind, Skullface probably knows that the subconscious is not a real thing. So he's not referring to a literal subconscious. When that word is quoted by Skullface in Mission 30, it's got quotes around it. So he's not talking about a literal subconscious. He's talking about a symbolic subconscious. And it's really memories, right? So Volgin here, this is where we see that he's really our trauma personified. We're feeling the fear of him walking towards us and him coming to kill us, essentially. And again, I think that relates to how Venom has been given the Zero gene, and he kind of has Zero's memories from here. Even though it's not literally Zero, it's this, Zero decoy that we're standing in for. But so he comes in. It's kind of also a reference to Mission 20, the walking towards Venom, bending down to strangle him. I think that fear of that moment is like a constant thing in Chico's mind, and he has to get over it. And so that's why it comes up here in the prologue. It comes up in Mission 20. It comes up in Mission 30. Well, technically 30 and 31, the ending cutscene of 30 and the beginning of 31, when Volgin is walking towards Venom right before Eli hijacks Tretage. It's the same thing, the walk towards and the fear and the freezing up. That's also kind of what Skullface does when he turns from being in the helicopter and starts walking back and we freeze and the camera zooms in. That's kind of also our same reference. It's also in the side-up where you finally extract Volgin. He does the walk again and grabs Snake and is reenacting stuff that Big Boss did. And then he sees Snake's eye and sees, oh, that's not the blue eyes of the naked Snake that I know. And then probably realizes, I'm not even doing stuff that I did. I'm doing stuff that dude did to some other guy later. And so that's, again, it's all memories. And it's all kind of memetics and memories as memetics. And, it's like a sorting out of whose memories are these, essentially, that we're seeing here. So after Volgin blows up and we get blown back and then the water banishes him, we go down the hallway. We got this, Venom's right arm is dislocated and Ishmael has to put it back into its socket. And then he says, next time, do it yourself. And so this is, again, the do it yourself theme comes up in Mission 31 when Kaz is done shooting Skullface and he's like, kill me. Kaz says, do it yourself. It's a recurring theme here. So the do it yourself theme, it comes back up and it's just related to how all of this game's real story is not meant to be laid out there on the surface. It's not meant to be something that's just given to you and you just get it. It's got to be something that you go sort of do yourself. You sort of realize it yourself. You are the one who really has to make all of the big realizations in this game's story, which I think is really fun. I kind of, I like a good plot twist, don't get me wrong, but isn't it even better when the movie does the soft sell and you get it later and you're like, oh, and then it all clicks. That's kind of what's supposed to happen here. So then after this scene with the fear stuff and Volgin in the hallway and the setting of the shoulder again, there's another conflict. We escape. These guys were coming in, throw the smoke grenade by going into this little office, I guess you'll say it is. And the office is connected to a treatment room. It's like a nurse's station, really. And this is where the next cut scene depicting a conflict happens. And this one's really indicative to me of the pain. Just note how, brutal all these deaths are. There's a lot of, guys getting shot at very close range, like in their backs, and then turned over and then shot in their heads, or shot multiple times in their back until they're killed. It's kind of a sloppy, brutal way to kill a bunch of guys. Presumably kind of painful, I think the bullets themselves are standing in as the Payne's Hornets. And if you're wondering why am I saying Hornets, go back to Metal Gear Solid 3. They're not bees, y'all. They're Hornets. It's a hornet's nest. The bees thing is just a meme. Anyways. In this scene also, we've got a soldier who's assassinated this guy and then bends back down to check his ID and check his face just to be sure of something. So these soldiers who are here killing everybody are also checking the identity of the people who they're killing, meaning they're looking for someone specific. And I think that relates back to the whole, there was a kill, there was an assassination on Zero that was put out here. And, I don't know if if Big Boss actually had his own squad in there trying to assassinate Zero. I'm pretty sure it was just Big Boss there on his own infiltrating a big hospital that Zero had under his control. It's indicated later on that most of these XOF strike forces were really there to protect Zero from Big Boss. And so what they're doing here in the recreation is kind of altered a little bit. They're not just here to protect Zero. They're kind of also here to kill us. So it's a little bit of a switcheroo, But then after this little section with the pain, and then we avoid the next conflict, we see a dude get shot at the end of the hallway, but then we run and we get the stairwell. So this is the DNA helix stairwell. Look at the iron, grating, and there's these pairs of sort of diamond-shaped things that I think are representative of nucleotide pairs, and there's a little circle, kind of a bond, connecting each one of them. And the whole thing, it spirals, like a helix, or like a double helix, I think, actually. No, it's like a regular helix. The double part would be like the top and the bottom parts of the iron railing. Anyways, you can also see this DNA helix kind of as a symbol for history itself. In the way that I said that the arm is kind of symbolic of memories. If the arm is DNA, and it's made of DNA, right, and its whole design is determined by DNA, then the DNA is kind of symbolic of the narrative itself and the story itself. And so it's kind of like we're not just navigating genetics here, we're also kind of navigating history in a way. And again, I think that relates back to how this whole thing is a recreation of history. So after we go through the stairwell, also, there's these cell doors. Once we get to the part in the stairwell where we have to leave the stairwell, we exit through this weird-looking door. It's these cell doors, like cell bars, that look like they belong in a jail cell, or a crazy mental institution, a crazy person's place, crazy person's hospital. And I think the cell doors there are probably meant to recall Chico's cell and how Chico was held in a cell, and like Snake's cell in general, and jail cells in general, and how this whole experience is kind of like a sort of meant to recall like you're captive by this experience, and there's kind of no way you can get out of it, and the whole looping context of this mission itself and the game and all that. It's like this whole game is kind of a puzzle box, a loop that you're stuck in, and you kind of have locked yourself in a little bit, but you also are being chased by some stuff within there. It's there's also, I think, a vaguely kind of PT-esque feel here with the whole hallway that turns to the right, and us doing a lot of right turns in this whole hospital. The PT indoor house kind of context, I think, just kind of applies in general here. But this scene that we come into when we go through the cell doors is a bunch of patients and doctors and nurses waiting around, and then they all get shot. It's a mass death scene. And there's also this Ishmael-looking dude in the front, but it's not Ishmael. We know that that's like a fake Ishmael who looks exactly like him, but the real Ishmael's in this room off to the side. The camera doesn't actually show our Ishmael going up to that position in the front. It pans away from him before he even gets to the door that he's going to actually sneak into. And so that's put there as just another way of hinting you in on the fact that there are decoys, and there's, sort of vaguely this, it kind of also implies this hallucination context too, that like, did you really see what you saw, because the first time you go through the game, you're going to think that's Ishmael because it zooms in on his butt and everything. It makes you think that you're looking at Snake's butt, and that's not Snake. And you should know that. That guy's butt is way flat, y'all. That's not the thick, succulent cheeks of Solid Snake that we're familiar with. This guy's got a flat ass. It's Fox. I should know. I've got a flat ass. So this scene, this mass death scene, is related to the sorrow. And I've said this in my big, Metal Gear Decoded videos, that the sorrow's power probably came from him sort of like metaphorically reaching out to his other dying comrades beside him while he was dying in a mass death scene. And so this sort of like empathetic reaching out was sort of reacted to by the parasites by literally forging connections between the sorrow and these other dead or dying soldiers around him. And so it's like mass death scenes relates to, it's a sorrowful scene, right? And then there's this little part in the treatment room. Now this part's fun. It's not actually an encounter. There are cutscenes, but the cutscenes don't depict an encounter with the enemy. We don't actually have an encounter. We avoid an encounter in here. And it's the other people in this room that have the encounter. Now there are, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cells in here, right? That this guard goes into and kills people in. And these cells are kind of interesting, like there's these sort of closed off areas with some computer and other kind of equipment in there, some medical equipment, but it seems like the people are just in there laying down. It's not really clear why they're in there or what kind of treatment they're undergoing, I think this is probably where they put people through VR. It's like the VR therapy little cells. And these people are probably hooked up to little VR units, and they're going through some kind of a simulation, and they probably get a rude awakening here. And I think that relates to why that one patient, the last one, who stands up and then turns towards the guy who shoots him, and he falls back into the curtain, and then you can see the outline of his face on the back of his face, like he's got two faces, right? Well, the two-face thing, I think it just relates to how Fox literally kind of has his Snake face and then his player-selected avatar. He literally has two faces. And how I've talked about how the Viscount is kind of a representation of Fox symbolically, and he's quite literally called a two-faced son of a by Kaz in the post-mission stuff. If you pick up all of the prisoners in that mission, and the two-faced thing, I think also probably relates to Batman and that character, and yeah, all kinds of stuff there, which we're not going to go into. But this non-encounter in here also gives you an opportunity to take a good look at Ishmael's eyes. And you can see he's got a right eye and a left eye, and they're both moving around. They don't look like there's like a glass eye and a regular eye. It looks like two eyes. And so that's, if you're thinking that this guy is the original big boss, this is supposed to be your first big, like, aha clue as to it's not him. He's got both eyes. Of course, we know that the parasite stuff can do crazy things, but it's complicated. I don't know if the original big boss could have just grown his eye back either, if he hadn't like suffered otherwise life-ending injuries. I think the whole the way the parasites work is they wait for a death event essentially before they do like their supernatural healing stuff. So, anyways, I think so. When you leave this room, Ishmael says, "We're sitting ducks, blend in with the bodies, get down on your stomach and crawl." And these bodies are all super bloody. And so he does literally mean blend in with the bodies right now and just crawl and don't move and don't get caught. But I also think there's like this other context you could take for his instruction. If you want to blend in with those bodies better, how could you do it? Well, you could be bloody. And how could you be bloody? Well, you could be a demon when you have the permanent bloody appearance. Now, that won't actually show up in this mission ever, either in the 0 version of it or the 46 mission of it, version of it, but it's like maybe his way of saying blend in with the bodies is sort of a double entendre for become a demon, essentially. I think the game is, again, asking you to become kind of okay with doing the demonic stuff in this game, as in like developing nukes and killing and so on. It is just a game in the end, right? So, the blood is like, it's more symbolism. Again, it's not just there to literally represent you've done bad. It's blood. I almost could do a whole lecture on just what the symbolism of blood is. There's a lot to go into there, but it's like life itself. Let's just say that. And so it's not just like the blood is representing your bad deeds. It's also representing your life force. And it has like a positive, kind of connotation that you can take to the symbol as well. So now let's talk about how Ahab is spotted in that scene. It's very funny. There's this puddle of liquid on the ground that one of these soldiers has got his boot in right in front of Ahab's face, and he notices it. The soldier notices the wetness and then looks down. And he's like, hey, that wasn't there a second ago. Turns back around, traces the wet pool back to Ishmael's body. And we look over at it. The first time I played through the game, I thought, oh God, Ishmael's pissed himself. It's an Otacon reference. Hideo, why did you have to put it here? Now you're going to get us spotted. And of course, he hasn't peed himself. There's an IV bag underneath him that's busted, and it's just a fake out, right? It's just a little head fake. And Ahab acts exactly like I just narrated my own thoughts, right? He kind of looks at that water and thinks, oh God, we're about to get spotted, and then sees it coming from his crotch and probably thinks, oh God, he's pissed, and then sees the IV bag and he's like, oh, it wasn't what I thought it was. And his sort of like mental processes that he's going through to sort of sort all that out is happening so slowly that by the time the soldier's not interested in it anymore and is moving on, the light on this soldier's gun is still on and goes over Ahab's face, and sees him moving and having this stupid expression on his face from being faked out. And then if you notice, there's this slick thing that the game does where it looks back up at this soldier who's spotted Venom, and all of a sudden he knocks Venom's body over, but his gun's light is now off. We haven't heard like a click or seen it go off because the camera panned away from it. When the camera pans back, light's just off. And then he turns the light on again for emphasis. That's just an editing trick that they did, because they can do that in games. You can't exactly do that in films the same way. Like, you would have to literally turn it off. In the game, they can like virtually turn it off, which is, it's literal, I guess. But, you couldn't exactly do that without having someone physically turn it off on a film set, right? And that's like the kind of thing like maybe they add a CGI thing in post to emphasize or something, like a lighting thing added in post or something like that. You could think of that as that light being turned off sort of behind our backs is like a sort of another recontextualization, a part of this whole magic trick. But Ahab is spotted here by this fake out. So it's like it's his reaction. It's his reaction to seeing all of this stuff that gets him spotted, right? And his reaction, it's kind of a slow one, right? But that's what really causes all the stuff here. And the soldiers themselves are kind of reactive, right? And it's like their reactions to what they see that causes them to do what they're doing. And so I think in a way this whole scene stands in for Volgan's DNA. I think of Volgan kind of as the metaphorical reactor, as in like a nuclear reactor, a power reactor. Like the sun is kind of a giant fusion reactor, and like reactions, and all that stuff. It's this whole scene kind of is related to how you react from seeing something by thinking of a memory, right? If you've seen something that's happening in front of you that you've seen before, you're immediately going to think of that thing in the past. And so memory recall from seeing a thing is kind of a reaction. Deja vu is kind of a reaction, right? And so that's kind of what all's going on there. Let's see, how much do we have left in here? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more, and then we're going to call it quits here, and I'll do the rest in part 2. So, this scene also with Volgin, after he's taken out the guards, has him getting shot with several missiles by a helicopter outside. And you can kind of think of this scene as another recreation of the bridge scene with the railguns that we've seen with Fortune in Metal Gear Solid 2, and the bridge scene that we see in the end of Snake Eater with Volgin getting blown up on the bridge, and kind of the Virtuous Mission scene at the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 3 with Volgin on the bridge again and saying Kuwabara to ward off the lightning strikes. I think that Volgin's origin was probably getting hit with a railgun while he was on a bridge. And it destroyed his body, but his reaction to it happening like in the way it did caused the parasites to sort of like recreate his body with the power of reactivity. And it included like the electric kinetic force that he was hit with by that railgun. And I think that's why he can absorb bullets. And other kinetic stuff like grenades and missiles and whatnot. The last scene I'll talk about then is once we've escaped Volgin and seen him kind of get shot with the railgun, and then we bring up the water again to dispel him. There's this part where we go down the stairs again and then go into a little hallway, and you have to hide. Ishmael will have a gun, but you don't have one yet. And there's a guard coming, and Ishmael pops out and shoots the guard. And then you walk up to the guard, and a little cutscene plays. Now, that was a cutscene depicting a conflict, so this is another part of the DNA, I think. But it doesn't really stand for its own sort of individual person in the way that all these other ones do. This is just some random soldier, right? It's the emphasis in this scene is the gun. Really, it's the gun itself that Ishmael picks up, cycles the bullet out while he checks the clip, cycles the bullet, hands it over, checks the mag. Sorry, and then it's like this passing of the gun, right? So we know that Big Boss calls himself, or Naked Snake calls himself a gun in Peace Walker. I am a gun, and so I think this passing of the gun is sort of a passing on of the Big Boss legacy from Ishmael to Ahab. It's like Ishmael's sort of been the one taking the legacy from this point, or up to this point, I should say. And from here, Ahab is really going to be Big Boss from here on out. And that's why we're the one who's really in charge of doing all the shooting from here on out. And he just kind of does the distraction stuff. And if you wonder why he doesn't shoot either one of those two guys in the next hallway, I think that's why. I think it's, in a way, you are Ishmael and Ahab, so you're supposed to shoot them both. But with that said, I'll come back next time and finish this. There's 3 more pages of notes I have that I'll go through a little bit quicker. But yeah, that's part 1 for the prologue and the hospital mission, mission 46. Tune in next time when I finish this in part 2. Peace.